Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Judith Rose, Acting Director of Villa Albertine, and I'm delighted to welcome you tonight for the 8th installment of the Museum series, organized in partnership with the Center for Curatorial Leadership. This evening's dialogue will focus on the role and the impact of French-American Museum Exchange, or FRAME, a transatlantic network that brings together 32 museums from France and North America, 4 of which are represented here tonight. Launched last February, the Museum series aims to imagine the museums of tomorrow by providing a unique space for women leaders to meet and exchange ideas in the context of unprecedented questioning of these institutions. Just a few days after the conclusion of FRAME's annual Congress, which took place last week at the Houston Fine Arts Museum, the directors of 4 member institutions, Sophie Lévy from the Musée d'Art de Nantes, Laure Dalon from the Musée des Augustins in Toulouse, Esther from the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, and Jung of the St. Louis Art Museum have graciously agreed to share their insights on the contemporary challenges of museum leadership with Zoe Kahr from the Memphis Brooks Art Museum. Their dialogue will likely resonate on the other side of the Atlantic, where 6 of their American curator colleagues participating in our museum's Next Generation program began their exploration of French institutions yesterday. Launched earlier this year, the program aims to provide young French and American curators with a broader and mutual understanding of the transatlantic museum ecosystem. We already welcomed the cohort of French curators who traveled to LA and to New York City this past spring. The US cohort will have the opportunity to meet with leadership at France's most prestigious institutions, such as the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, and the Centre Pompidou, and to exchange with professionals at lesser known but highly innovative museums across France. Thanks to the generosity of a visionary patron who wishes to remain anonymous, the museum's Next Generation program will continue for the next 4 years, allowing us to promote and support 50 promising curators from France and the US. Now, as we're all eager for the discussion to begin, let me briefly introduce our speakers tonight. Sophie Lévy serves as Director and Chief Curator of the Musée d'Art de Nantes, which she reopened in June 2017 after 6 years of renovation and expansion, bringing new life to collections that span from the 13th century to contemporary art. Long engaged in promoting transatlantic cultural exchange, she formerly served as Deputy Director of the European Center of the Terra Foundation for American Art, as well as Curator of the Museum of American Art in Giverny. And maybe you should raise your hand when I say your name, so everybody will identify you. Laure Dalon was appointed Director of the Musée des Augustins in Toulouse last year, and has overseen several major projects, including the renovation of a large 14th century cloister and the overall reorganization of the museum's collection. An expert in museum rebuilding, she also presided over the major renovation of the Musée de Picardie, which reopened in 2020. Esther is Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. A specialist in French art, she recently co-organized an exhibit of 18th century French drawings from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France with the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Tours, and is the co-curator of the forthcoming Guillaume Lethière exhibition, which will open at the Clark in June 2024. Jung was appointed Director of the St. Louis Art Museum in 2021. Through exhibitions and collection development, she has worked to expand the definition of American art and reflect greater diversity, while strengthening community engagement and collaborative partnerships. She previously served as director of the New Britain Museum of American Art and brings extensive international experience following a decade at the Guggenheim. And finally, Zoe Kahr is the executive director of the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art, engaged in building a new home for the museum that will open in 2026. She certainly has a distinct vision of what it means to build the museum of tomorrow. We are privileged to have her with us to moderate tonight's dialogue. Before handing the floor to William Beekman, co-president of Frame North America, let me finally express my special thanks to Agnes Gund, Marie-Josée Craves, Denise Littlefield-Sobel, Sana Sabag, and Beatrice Stern for their generous support of the Villa Albertine Museum series. Finally, dear William, the floor is yours. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Judith, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am William Beekman, and I'm the co-president of Frame North America. Since our organization is completely bilateral, I must also bring you greetings from Christelle Creff, who was our French co-president. She's also the chef du service des Musées de France at the Ministry of Culture, and unfortunately, she cannot be here tonight because of her duties in Paris. From Frame, we also have Pierre Provoyeur and Emily Van Haesbroek. Pierre is our French directeur scientifique, in charge of some of the programs that we sponsor, and Emily is our French executive director. If I may just give you a little bit about Frame. The French-American Museum Exchange, which we fondly call Frame, is almost 25 years old. It's a consortium of more than 30 art museums in France and North America, which promotes dialogue and cultural exchange between museum professionals in France, Canada, and the United States, hence North America, not America. Although I think America means North America, never mind. Frame just held its annual conference at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, where more than 100 museum professionals from both sides of the Atlantic gathered for more than 2 days of meetings and programs. At the meeting, Frame membership voted unanimously to approve a new strategic plan for Frame's next 5 years. And pursuant to this strategic plan, Frame has a goal of welcoming new members and developing even more networking and public programming assets for the public and for its membership. Frame's vision is to cross borders and open minds among museum professionals, museum audiences, and cultural leaders, and to provide a springboard for member and affiliate organizations to share best practices and resources beyond the network through partnerships and exchanges. I invite you to visit our website, framemuseums.org, for further information. I'd also like to thank Villa Albertine for inviting Frame to participate in its museum series. This is exactly the type of program that Frame sponsors, bringing people together to reflect on museological issues of common interest. I would like to thank everyone who was responsible for this program: Judith, Gaëtan Bruel, François Brady, and Louise Negre. It's particularly wonderful for me to see Zoe Kahr here. Zoe used to be at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which is one of our museums, and she was a stalwart and a beloved participant in our programs. Now let me turn over to the people that you came here to listen to, but if you have any questions about Frame, please do come up after and ask us. Thanks.
All right, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you for those wonderful introductions. Thank you, Judith, thank you, Bill. And thank you for hosting us in this really glorious space. I hadn't been here before, and all of us were commenting as we were waiting upstairs just how spectacular the space is and what a wonderful place it is to be together and to think about cultural exchange. So thank you again. I thought we would start, since we are here under the aegis of Frame, by talking a little bit about how Frame has impacted your work in terms of cultural exchange. And maybe people can just kind of jump in as you see fit.
I can start. So I'd like to say thank you to our Frame colleagues for bringing us together. And I think Frame is just such an incredible organization. I mean, working in museums, you need friends, you need partners, you need thought partners, and that is what Frame is so good at fostering. And my introduction to Frame was as a curator and attending workshops, talking about ideas and exhibitions, and some of those early friends I made through Frame are still people who I call upon today, who I ask advice, from, who I might ask for help with a loan for an exhibition or working through a programmatic idea. And it's these kind of the through lines I think are so special. And my relationship with Frame is now, 10 plus years, and I think some of us probably have that same experience. Zoe, I think you do.
I do. Anyone else want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in because in many ways, while the St. Louis Art Museum has long been a member of Frame, this is my first experience being a part of Frame in the context of being a part of a museum with an encyclopedic collection and as a part of Frame. I've now been to maybe 2 meetings, so I'm just getting to know Frame and not only the relationships but also the benefits. And of course, in understanding how the St. Louis Art Museum, as a charter member, has really not only participated but benefited through many partnerships and collaborations, whether it be through exhibitions, long-term loans, but also a number of programmatic exchanges, in particular among our education teams. It seems like that's been an incredibly fruitful collaboration. But I have to say also, coming in anew to see the collegiality and the camaraderie across the Atlantic, and not only among American museums, but also our French peers and partners. I think the conversations and the dialogues that I've seen and been a part of, I think is one of the many special things about this relationship that I'm looking forward to see bear fruit, just as Esther has said, in the years to come.
I have been the director of Frame Museum for just a year, but I heard about this network and I was curious about it. I heard about a very unifying network, and I have to say that I'm not disappointed by the first meetings I had the chance to take part in. Actually, the Musée des Augustins is closed for renovation, so it's not very obvious to think about exhibition projects, for instance, but I think this network is a good place to think about novelty or reinvention in a way, thanks to the help and the ideas and the exchanges with a colleague of different backgrounds and different ways of thinking.
So I discovered Frame when I was working for the Terra Foundation, and I was in Giverny, and we would host a meeting with the Frame members in Giverny every year. And I was really interested by this organization. So when I left the Terra, I was missing those relationships, because the Terra was really about translating one culture to another constantly. It was really exhausting, but fascinating, and so I started missing that. And so when I left the Terra for a modern art museum in Lille, Le Lame, and which was not part of Frame. And then I thought the next museum has to be a Frame museum. And that's one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons why I chose Nantes. And I was so happy to go back to that, you know, tension, you know, sometimes a little difficult to understand where the other comes from and what's his goal, what his goals are. But I kind of like that, the fact that we are alike but very different in so many ways. So we teach to each other, I mean each other's culture, and I really enjoy that. So I'm really excited to be part of this organization, and I hope there will be numerous projects to come.
Thank you all. I like the way that we have several very, very long-standing frame sort of, maybe acolytes is the right word on this panel, and kind of reaching back into the distant history of frame. It was originally founded as the French Regional American Museum Exchange Network, and the focus on regionalism as applied with a very kind of, to your point, Sophie, from a French perspective, was about the distinction between the regions and the capital, and the way that kind of played out in the US was a little bit different. And when we were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about the tension between local, regional, national, international, and how that plays out across programs, across audiences, across board memberships. Many museums have national boards now. So I'd love to hear you all talk a little bit about that tension.
I can start because I think I live in the most remote place on the panel. So I am delighted and honored to work at the Clark Art Institute, which is in Berkshire County in Massachusetts. And it's one of the many reasons it's a very special place is that it is in a kind of pastoral magic land, far from major airports and train stations and et cetera. And we're always thinking about this question, which is a great one, which is how to serve our local audience, our region, how to also have a national presence and an international presence, and all of those things are equally important, with maybe an emphasis on our immediate region. And we do this very strategically in lots of different ways. And after my preamble about being very remote, I will say also that I'm constantly shocked at how international my institution is, and we achieve that through a very rigorous research and academic program. So we are always hosting scholars from around the world in residence, and these incredible minds and thinkers are contributing to our community. So that's just one way. But then again, in terms of being local, I would say is right now a real priority of my colleagues in our really outstanding Department of Education, led by Rana Tolgan-Ostheimer, who is a proud Frame member, is how to expand our outreach to local school children. But again, all of these things are happening at the same time, and it's a challenge, but I think also a wonderful complexity about working in a museum today, and I'm sure we all have comparable stories to share, maybe.
Yeah, I have the same feeling, actually. I've always felt that the museums in French cities have a quite rare status. They have to address to locals, but also to tourists. We have mission of education, of cohesion, but we have the capacity to be attracted and to be attracted beyond the borders of the city and the region and even sometimes the country. And as the politics is often done on a local scale, it's complicated, I think, for our municipalities to deal with those different aspects of our identity, and it always is a quite subtle balance between both of them. But I think it's a challenge, but a very interesting challenge, and one of the strengths of our institutions.
It's probably the essence of museums to be very local, we're kind of local service to the communities, almost like a swimming pool. You know, you can get there every day, and it has to be useful for the schools. And so there's something that is really grounded in the history of and the culture of the city that really counts. And every city in France, even if it's a very small country compared to this country, has this very distinct history and distinct relationship to their communities. Having moved all around France, I really felt the difference. And on the other hand, you know, there are some masterpieces in the museum that have been seen by inhabitants of every continent, because there's this kind of universal power of art, well, when we think of it in a very big terms, that really also affects what we have to do. We're constantly moving from being extremely local and extremely universal. That's what's pretty special, I think, in what we deal with. And of course, the community, in terms of the audience, the local community represents maybe, local meaning the region, represents maybe 2/3 at least 2/3 of our audience. And the foreign visitors, even in Nantes, not only in Paris, still represents more than or over 10% of our visitors. So it's also important. So that's the reality of our work.
Well, I think the similar case might be said for the St. Louis Art Museum. You know, our regional identity and our institutional identity has really always been intertwined and interconnected. And the ways in which we see ourselves locally, regionally, nationally, and even internationally, I think those perspectives have shifted and also coexisted really throughout our history. And what I might just do is give you a little background and context, because I find the St. Louis Art Museum model quite unique in that when we were founded in 1879, St. Louis at the time was actually the 4th largest city in the United States. So St. Louis, as we were seeing ourselves then in that national context, is a little bit different than we might be seeing ourselves today. So that was sort of interesting to think about our very genesis. But at the same time, the main museum building that we're in is a Cass Gilbert design building. And it is a building that is also the only remaining surviving building from the World's Fair that St. Louis hosted in 1904. And the building that we currently are in, we moved into and reopened in 1908 as a museum. And in that building, which also sits in Forest Park, not unlike the beautiful Central Park that we see here, but is actually 500 acres larger than Central Park. So a really beautiful urban oasis. And from 1908, the St. Louis Art Museum has been a municipal agency and also has, for well over a century, been one of the few museums in the United States that has offered free admission. And this relationship and or tension, if you will, of on the one hand, thinking about national and international is really fundamental to our early history. And I would say remains so as we continue to grow our collection and think about our exhibition and our programs on a world-class level. But really at the core, our priority remains deeply rooted locally to St. Louis. And that also relates to many aspects from our governance structure to our funding structure, in that in the early 1970s, legislation established the Zoo Museological District, of which the St. Louis Art Museum is a part of. So we're actually a political subdivision within the state of Missouri. And what that also means is that we're very, very fortunate in that 2/3 of our annual operating budget is supported by property tax revenue. And so we are in many ways a really successful model of public and private partnership that has really thrived for 50 years. And so on one hand, we have a really wonderful and respectful relationship with our local civic leaders. Really, our funding comes from our region's residents. And so the only way that that funding gets undone is through a public vote. And what that also means is that through this quite extraordinary financial arrangement that provides financial stability and sustainability, that in many ways provides a bit of protection from changes in political leadership and or challenges of government appropriations. So I mention all of this because at the end of the day, what that also means is that for us at the St. Louis Art Museum, our biggest donor, our most important stakeholder, are St. Louisans. They're the taxpayers of St. Louis. So that becomes the sort of guide from which we think about everything that we do, from how we program, what art we collect, our staff, our board. In many ways, the funding model and the governance structure becomes not only a gift, but also a constant reminder of who we are and who we serve.
Thank you. A little related to that, as we think about identity, we've mentioned this a little bit in this conversation, and we talked a little bit about it as we were preparing for this talk. Museum careers require itinerants. I just moved from Los Angeles to Memphis, and we've been talking about regional identity and how we museums embody that regional identity. And then therefore, as a museum employee, you come to embody that regional identity, and then you might move to another museum and have a totally different regional identity. So I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about your own pathway to your current museum and how those various identities might have impacted your work.
Okay, I can take that one. So I've had the great fortune in my career to have worked in a number of institutions, I think almost traversing the North America. So started my early career in New York City, went to Cincinnati, Ohio. I then went on to San Francisco to become the head of European paintings at the Fine Arts Museums there, and now I'm back at the Clark on the eastern side of this country. And what a privilege to have lived in all those incredible places, which could not be more different from one another. And I think what you learn when you go to a new place is that there's a whole new dialogue that you have to observe. There's a whole new language and all new types of seeing. And what I've really learned over time is that it takes time to know a place and to respect a place and to really to be invested. And it's so important to have that genuine understanding or desire for understanding, I think, in a museum, which is to serve the public and to welcome the public. One must be fluent in the local dialect. It's vital. But I think we're also privileged to have the jobs and experiences we've had. It's a joy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was born in the south of France, but I worked into Amiens, it's the north of France. So it was a kind of discovery, and I had to feel, to understand this place. It was not so obvious, and I agree, it takes time, but it's very interesting, and I think it's a strength to be new in a place, because we are able to enlighten the identity and the specificities of this identity. And when I came back to the south of France, in Toulouse, I felt myself as a new inhabitant of this part of the France. So it was the same, and I'm still in it. I have to understand and to think about what is the specificity of this place and this town. And I think my role, in a way, is to enlighten and to show to inhabitants what in what they are rich. I don't know if it's very clear. I agree. We have to be genuine and to be as open-minded as we can. And I think it's very appreciated by people. I made choices for an exhibition this year, and for me it was really important to begin with Toulouse and its identity, for instance. And visitors were very, I don't know how to say, charmed or very interested in the choices I made, actually, as a new inhabitant of the city, I think. So it's our knowledges as historian of art, but also our sensitivity that we have to mix in a way, in the way we are working for our museums.
Well, I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and I initially came to the United States to pursue a liberal arts education. And it was at college that I discovered art history, which led me to this career path that I never even knew was a possibility. And while I spent a number of years really early in my career working in Korea at Sotheby's and then as a young curator at the Samsung Foundation for Culture, I came back a second and final time in 1996 to New York, where I did work at the Guggenheim for 13 years during a time of really exponential growth. And it was pretty exciting to see the museum grow from being in New York and Venice to really a international expansion. And at the height, at one point in time, the Guggenheim had something like a global attendance of 5 million visitors a year, which is pretty extraordinary. But it did get me thinking, who are these 5 million people? These 5 million nameless, faceless people. And as extraordinary as the experience that I had and gained, and so much that I learned, what I was really beginning to question was who are our audiences, and who and or what are our communities? And it's a very interesting question to pose in a place like New York, where you have a very transient population. And it was one of the reasons that led me to move outside of New York. And I won't go through my CV, but I've had, in the last 15 years, experiences that led me to both move to and live in East Lansing, Michigan, as part of the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum, to the New Britain Museum of American Art in Connecticut, to now being in St. Louis. And so, through that career trajectory of having worked in a variety of different museums, from corporate museums to private museums to academic museums to civic museums, and Zoe, like you said, to be in many ways an itinerant museum director living in different cities, you encounter different places in different ways. Sometime in this trajectory, about 20 years ago, I became an American citizen, but my family still all lives in South Korea. So in every new city that I go to, in some ways, I'm searching myself personally for some kind of a support structure, given that I don't have any family here in the United States. So in some ways, at the risk of sounding a bit sentimental, I think where my personal and my professional aspirations converge is that in many ways, I find that museums have the potential to be those places of community, of and for communities. And to be not only a museum of and for communities, but also a place of belonging as well. One example that I would love to share, if I may, is that when I was the director of the New Britain Museum of American Art, I hosted a naturalization ceremony. And if you've never attended a naturalization ceremony where you become an American citizen, I highly recommend it. It's an incredibly moving ceremony and event. And I thought at the time, what better place to become an American citizen than at an American art museum? And I was very pleased that earlier this year we were able to host a naturalization ceremony at the St. Louis Art Museum as well. And in each of these circumstances, to be able to address and welcome these individuals who are coming from so many different countries, coming together to become American citizens, and then to say, I know exactly what you're feeling. I've been in your shoes before. And I, too, when I was growing up in Korea, had no idea that I could become the director of the St. Louis Art Museum, and yet here I am welcoming all of you. And to say that this gives me great hope and excitement for your futures as well. And as part of that, we gave everyone complimentary family memberships to the museum as a way of not only congratulating them on becoming American citizens, but also in some ways welcoming them not only to this country, but also welcoming them to a new museum community. Because while they may have left their countries in many ways and their allegiances to their previous countries, what I wanted to convey is that their cultural traditions still live on in museums, and they're always there for them to come back to and to have a sense of home and have a sense of belonging, and in many ways to open up a community not only with the St. Louis Art Museum, but by and large all museums, where hopefully everyone will feel welcome and will feel a sense of their own histories and cultures and heritages as well.
Wow, I don't think there's anything we can add to that. No, I was just thinking when I was listening to all the stories, which has a lot to do with moving and being a stranger or a foreigner to our culture, is that I remember a landscape designer telling me, when you see a landscape for the first time, you see what's wrong in the landscape and what you should, tweak or change. And then if you stay long enough or too long, you become part of the landscape and you don't see anything. And I think that's exactly how I feel. I've always been a foreigner to any places where I've been, except in museums, so I agree. Museums are always home. I always feel very protected and safe and at home in museums. But otherwise, I'm looking for, as you are, this moment where I see what should be changed, and when I'm part of the landscape, I need to move. I need to leave.
Thank you, that was beautiful. And I think maybe we'll do one last question and then open the floor up. So I'm just curious, we talked a little bit about the network and the intimacy and these long conversations that Frame members have had across time. And as you're listening to the network, what are the big issues our field is facing? And to what extent, if you have a sense, are they consistent in the US and in France, or are they very different? So.
Okay, well, I'll start, and someone else take it away. I would say absolutely, and I'll speak for what's happening in American museums. There are much needed, very urgent conversations happening about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and this is really top of mind in my museum and when I speak to colleagues about systematic reform and doing better on all levels, in all departments, all colleagues. And this is something that we talk a lot about systematically, at least in my institution. And I'm curious to ask my French colleagues if you can respond to that. I mean, I'd be curious about how these dialogues or levels of urgency might be playing out in France. Yeah.
We're much slower than you are, and we're not there yet. It's funny because I have the same impression with sustainability. We're obsessed with sustainability. I mean, the whole society is. Well, it's moving too slowly in that direction, but still obsessed. And we're starting to work really seriously on how we can have less impact in our production of exhibitions and, you know, climate control and whatever. I don't see that too much in the American museums. Whereas for the communities, the equity, and we're so much behind you guys, and we have still so much work to do. So it's interesting when we have these dialogues in Frame, we are both sometimes surprised by what our colleagues tell us, and I think this is an area where we can, you know, learn from each other a lot. Yeah.
I think maybe another difference is about the place given to communities into American museums. We were struck about that during our congress in Texas. Communities of really present or I don't know how to say that, very important, and curators in museums take care of communities and talk about communities all the time. As in France, I think it's kind of a taboo. Actually, it's not a word we are used to use in a way. I don't know what you say about that.
Well, I think what's really interesting is, as we're talking about diversity, equity, sustainability, community, as much as we're talking about them as separate topics, there's actually a lot of commonality or relationship among those key areas. And I think what we could benefit from the most is, as we continue these conversations, to find where they connect and how they might align, and increasingly to be able to learn from one another. I think that would be definitely a future conversation I'd love to have with all of my colleagues here.
Thank you. That feels like a very appropriate stopping point. Let's keep learning from each other. Thank you all for your very thoughtful answers to my somewhat annoying questions. And at this point, maybe we can open up the floor to any questions from the audience. Or we can all go have a drink, depending on what you like. Yes?
Thank you. I was very interested in what you said about American museums' prioritization of addressing issues of diversity, equity, access. And I agree this is an important task, but in an encyclopedic museum like you have, I was really impressed by how you said this involves every department and every member of staff. And it's the thing at the Met that I think about a lot, because it's much easier for people who work on contemporary art, 20th century, 19th century, and then when you get back further, where most of the artists were white males, and do you have any thoughts on how one might work towards those agendas in these earlier departments?
It's a great question, and one I think that all curators are thinking through. And I think a place to start is thinking about the words that we use and the stories that we're telling with the objects that we have. I mean, you have a collection. It is what it is, but there are so many ways to interpret that collection in dialogues that open up the story, that can be much more inclusive and that bring more and more people in. And so I think that's a place to start. And it's ongoing. I mean, I think the work continues. It can never be done. We need to be committed. But yeah, so I would say just thinking about language and about narratives is a place where earlier departments can look to start that work. Thanks, Perrin.
One other, I think, thread that many museums, including the Met, I'm sure, have been thinking about is the ways in which these indeed stories can be told not only in their silos, but really across multiple departments, across geographies, across time, across medium. And I think the ways in which these narratives can be told that transcend these certain silos and categorizations really begin to open up these conversations to greater attention to these concepts and very important conversations that we need to have around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility.
Hi, thank you all for your thoughts this evening. I wondered if you might speak a little bit about mentorship. And I guess I'm thinking about this also in the context of Frame and the exchange across the Atlantic that you've all mentioned, but sort of how that plays into your institutional roles and also your sort of personal trajectories.
Can you explain what you mean by mentorship?
I think it can go in a number of directions, either your mentorship of the next generation or, thinking along the lines of the Villa Albertine program, or sort of the sort of formation that you've had and people who have brought you to where you are in your own trajectory.
We haven't talked about being a woman and a director.
I can maybe take a stab at answering that question, actually, because I was in the Frame network for so long. I think one of the major things I got out of it was mentorship. So I was in Los Angeles for 12 years, and I started there as head of exhibitions, and then eventually was promoted to deputy director. And as I was thinking about the next stage of my career, actually the people I talked to about it were all of the Frame directors that I had met and become friends with over this long period of time. And they were the people who talked me through the process and helped me think about what jobs to apply for and how to position myself. So for me, Frame has very much been a place of mentorship, and that's been a huge aspect of what I've taken away from it.
I can speak because one of my mentors is here tonight. And I've been incredibly fortunate to have incredible women role models, professionals in my life. And I think being a mentor and modeling mentorship is vital to the future of museums. And one of the parts of my job that I am so incredibly fortunate, feel fortunate about, is the fact that I get to teach in the graduate program at Williams College in the history of art. And mentorship is actually a part of that program. All of the students are placed in internships so that they have real working experience while they're studying. But beyond that, if our museums are going to continue to thrive, the next generation needs good role models and allies and leaders, and I think it's just incredibly important part of the work.
I won't talk about mentorship or models, but Frame Network is very inspiring because we met so many colleagues with so different experiences. I think that's what is the most interesting to me, even if it's not a mentor or model that we met.
Did you want to talk about female leadership, Sophie, since you asked the question?
It's just I was thinking, yeah, I think I was helped by women. Usually, in my whole career, I was constantly helped to get to the next stage by the women. So that just made me think the mentorship was probably, I didn't know it was what it was, but so I'm trying to give it back now to the young girls who tell me, oh, I maybe I'm not good enough for this position. So, you're great, just do it.
All right, shall we bring this to a close? Thank you so much to all my panelists, and thank you to a wonderful audience.